first conversation for this morning, we're joined by Audrey Matura, attorney at law, to be able to discuss what is always a very relevant topic. We're talking about our laws as it pertains to sex crimes. Good morning, Audrey.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for being able to come in to shed some light. As you know, there's been quite a bit of conversation taking place about the issue of sex crimes, and a lot of what we've been hearing over the past week is really no different from what we hear any other time there is a case that becomes very prominent. And I know that you've been one of the vocal persons speaking and trying to educate people. I just want to start off by hearing your reaction when you see the type of comments being made, whether about victims, whether about our laws in general.
Well, on a whole, I must say I'm very disgusted. Disgusted because I think that while I can speak a little bit about the law and the amendments here and there, I think we actually have a rape culture in this country. We don't respect women on a whole. We act very degrading towards women. And unfortunately, it's something that is perpetuated by women as well. I've had many foreign friends come and visit Belize, and the women tell you that they've never felt so sexually assaulted while walking the streets of Belize, because there's a culture, they said, that they feel that they're raped verbally, and the things men say to them. And over the weekend, I was in Kikaka, and I witnessed one of the most horrendous verbal assault against a tourist by two men. I mean, I can't even repeat the things they said to that woman and her husband. And you could see they were just fazed by it. And it's not the first time I've seen it, but it's one of the worst I've seen. And I'm thinking, imagine we want to attract visitors here. Tourism is one of our main staples. But yet when our female visitors come, that's one of the major complaints. One of my friends who has a business there, she tells me they've had so many complaints, like tourists come in sometimes crying, that they're so upset they can't believe the things men say to them. So that is at that level. But then in the home, it seems, we perpetuate this myth that, and I would blame our mothers in part, because many of us are the women promoting it, that men seem to have a sense of superiority or entitlement over your body. And it's a horrendous culture that we have. When it comes to the different cases, one of the most tragic things is that I would say at least 75% of the comments coming from women is attacking the woman further. The recent case of the 13-year-old with the police officer, I was amazed how many people threw the blame on the child and not on the adult. And in his case, he has a higher duty of protecting a child because he's a law officer. He knows the law. He knows what is or should know, I mean, the amendments and everything, but he of all persons know that was wrong. So my disgust is like, the word disgust is not sufficient. So while I can speak about different cases, what I really would want to see is for us to have education from very early, from the kindergarten level, where we talk openly about sexuality, because part of it is that sex is a taboo in our home, in our society. People are afraid to say the word penis and vagina, which those aren't bad words. Those are the proper biological words. So they come up with all these little names, some of them very vulgar, some of them cute, for lack of a better term. And that's where it starts. It starts when how we make our kids feel about their body.
About our body.
Right.
Would you agree, and this is just from my point of view here, that perhaps there has been a gradual change from what was once a conservative environment at home to now a more open or liberal space where kids and parents are able to more freely discuss certain aspects of sexuality?
No.
I could recall growing up in a household where indeed perhaps sex was taboo, but I guess with time now, I'm seeing younger persons being able to openly discuss certain aspects of sex and sexuality that wasn't there before. It didn't appear to be there before.
I think in some homes, yes, there's some openness, but I think the openness or the exposure comes more from the media. I think that there are some homes, like in my home, I will speak to my kids openly about sex and sexuality. But a lot of the other homes, is really the media influencing the children. So here we move from a society where parents don't even tell you when you will menstruate, what it is, puberty and all of that, to a society where the kids are bombarded with sex. I mean, you all have seen the video of local kids, girls and boys gyrating like if they're having sex with the floor already, coming out of our society. That doesn't mean that child is spoken to at home openly about sex and sexuality. It just means that they're exposed to images and ideas. They just hear these things, the songs. I mean, when you hear some little boys rapping these little songs, and I didn't even know what the songs meant, and these kids, you know, they just bubble it off.
Yeah.
So there's more bombardment about sex and sexuality. The songs are more sexual, and less actual conversation about it with them when they're exposed to it. There are some few homes where I would think that parents try and be more open-minded. But if the comments that we are reading on the media come from the parents and the mothers, especially these single mothers, they're the ones influencing how their sons and daughters see things, you know. And some of the times, those same people making those comments have been sexually assaulted.
Have been victims themselves, yeah.
And they don't want to face it because they blame themselves. So there is a whole, I don't know, culture that has gradually just accepted that sexual violence, and violence doesn't mean only the physical, even the verbal, the psychological, the sexual violence has become part of our culture. Because what I witnessed over the weekend that they did to those tourists, that was sexual violence, be it in a verbal nature, or one of the nastiest, derogatory things being said to them, broad daylight, and the men, they're like laughing, like getting attention by that. You know, I was...
Well, you know, you have a heavy sigh, and I think sometimes I find comfort in knowing that there are people out there who's sharing that very same sentiment. And while there is a proliferation of comments that we wouldn't see coming out from our society, there are still a growing number of people who understand the concept of ensuring that women are protected and girls are protected from any form of sexual violence, be it harassment or be it physical assault. And I'm thinking, because we've had this conversation in so many different fragments. We've had street harassment conversations on this show. We've had conversations about the prevalence of sexual violence on women and children in general in this country, and we still don't know the facts. But what you were speaking of, I think, is also a culture that we don't like to name, and we don't see much happening in terms of being able to address it. And that is where we have a hard time empathizing with victims of sexual violence. If a child is baby stage, we tend to be a lot more sympathetic. But once they move past a particular age, usually into the teenage years, it seems like that is lost on a large portion of society. Now, our laws reflect the fact that these children, which is what they are protected.
Should be protected, yes.
Yeah.
But it seems that the general population doesn't get it. Because a girl is 13, 14, 15, I mean, we actually still hear comments like, oh, she may know what you want, she may get it. But they don't understand that if the law puts a limit on the age, is because biologically your body may be blooming.
Yeah.
Psychologically, you're going through changes. You might be going through a rebellious stage. But what scientists have shown is that your brain is not developed enough to understand the consequences and the concept of what you're what you're getting into. That is why you cannot consent. That's why the law says with or without consent, meaning you may think she consents, but the mere fact that she's below 16, she's unable to give consent.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, it has been proven that your brain doesn't fully develop until 21. And the reason why marriages are allowed for a person between 16 and 18 with the parents' consent is because the law recognizes that you, again, cannot give consent. And so now they're putting the onus on the parents to say, okay, Marlene is only 16, but she wants to get married. She's not 18 yet. She can't consent on her own. We, the parents, will take the responsibility to give consent for her. That's one of the exceptions in marriage, you know, because marriage, for it to be lawful, you have to give consent. If you're wedded under duress, that's not a valid marriage. You can annul that marriage. So you, the individual, must be able to give consent, male and female, not only the female. So if the male gives consent under duress because the parents, they say we do it, that's an unlawful marriage. And there are all these little nuances that while we have it in the law, we fail to educate our people to understand that we are supposed to be a civilized society. We are not a tribal, brutalistic society. We are civilized. Civilized means that we put civil norms that governs our behavior. There was a time when marriages were allowed from 13 in this country. And that was just the other day when I was a young person. And I like writing about it because I came from that culture where my father believed at 13, by then you menstruate, he should marry off. That's the culture I came from. And it's a culture I had to fight against. I mean, my sisters were not permitted to complete primary school. It was okay to go home and learn to do the household things because then you'll get married. It's like your whole culture, your whole own parents hyper-sexualize you at that stage.
I was just about to go there. I believe we're living in a society, in a particular time where everything seems to be hyper-sexualized. And as a result, it's a confounding situation where you have children who are supposed to enjoy and be protected by certain rights, and then you have their exposure, and then you have adults who, for whatever reason, tend to think that, okay, well, it's fine to either say something or do something, either ignorant of the law or fully aware of the law. Because it's so out there, it seems to have become normal or acceptable.
You see, and there has to be a distinction. When we say talk about your kids about sex in the home at an early age, that's not hypersexualizing, that's educating them about their body.
I'm talking in the sense of what's on the media, what you listen to, and that sort of stuff.
And when you encourage them with certain sexual activity at too young of age, then that's the hypersexualizing. And people tend to think locally that when you talk about sex, oh, you're encouraging sex. It's in the context in which you talk about. And it's not only sex, the intercourse act, it's sexuality. It's about teaching your kids about their body.
Reproductive health.
Yes, and the consequences of certain action, or how you take care of certain parts of your body, or stuff like that. We don't seem to do that well. Kids become more aware at school, in later primary school. But I think it's something that should start from very, very early, from kindergarten, because they're so aware. But it's the level of language that graduates as you go along. And I'm learning too as a parent, because now I have a daughter and I've had to learn the different stages at which it's appropriate to say certain things to her and explain certain things, language to her. But I mean, one day, my daughter is listening to a video and she's in the office with me, and I hear it's about cholera, but I'm not, it's going on and off, and she likes to research these little things. And then suddenly it goes off and she says to me like, Mom, what's gonorrhea? I wanted to pass out, but I try to keep a straight face, because the experts tell you that when they ask you the question, they're ready for the answer. So I had to figure out in my brains now, how do I explain to a 10-year-old what's gonorrhea? Because talking about that had to be talking about sex and sexuality, you know? And I don't blame many parents that they don't know how to do it.
Because we were never
not taught, right? So whatever I learned by reading, unfortunately, because I could tell you, growing up, my daughter laughs each time I say this, but we were told babies came from planes. And we believed it. We were so innocent. We believed that a plane passes by, we run out and we say, plane, bring me a baby. I mean, it's crazy, but that's how bad it was.
Technology has changed the realm of society, because accessibility to information, good or bad, is so much easier. So it's whether the music or the YouTube videos that they watch all day long.
And even the cartoons have become sexualized.
And even if I protect my child from it, the friends may not be protected from it. So they go to school and they learn about it as well. But there's a lot in terms of parenting, I think, that still can play a
very
role.
Poor parenting overall in this country, unfortunately.
So when you were talking about, for example, the street harassment, and that's kind of, I don't even know if that's the first level, but there are two people here. There's the victim and there's the perpetrator. First of all, it seems that we still haven't taught or boys who become men that they can't just comment at random on a woman's body, physique, whatever about them. You don't even have the right to call them baby if they don't want you to.
Right.
But the other part is that I know growing up, when I had to walk home as a child, you know, I knew that my lesson from my mother was keep your head high and don't answer, don't say anything, ignore them.
Imagine.
And so you had to just accept the onslaught of very inappropriate
Yes.
things
Disgusting.
being told to you.
Disgusting.
So what I'm saying is we're talking about a society where the knowledge, whether correct or incorrect, is broadening, but our behaviors remain the same.
And worse. And that onslaught you're talking about only came one direction, because Isani won't tell us that he was walking to and from school and women were hissing and telling him all sorts of slick things, or they're those and we don't.
To be quite honest with you, I believe that catcalling is more a male thing. I've never really been particular for, you know,
Yeah.
making a comment or a pass at a woman. It's just not me. It's just not my personality. But I find that a lot of guys, that's what they do. Like if we're hanging out together and someone passes, someone will say something, and usually I try to discourage it, but it's part of our culture.
You look like the odd one and they call you names if you say.
Yeah.
I think my friends know better than that. But I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
it's more a male thing. So that
Yeah.
I personally have never really experienced a woman saying something to me that I would be
Exact my
uncomfortable
point.
with.
Yeah.
Exact my point, because that's not, women don't cut call. Or if it's for women, it's cut call, so it's men, is it dog call?
I have no idea.
But you see, and so, okay, so I start at that point because it starts to show from very early on that even as a child, you are not protected from hearing these things,
Yeah.
no matter how much protection is in place in your home or in your day-to-day activities. So we see where there is an inclination to say and comment how we feel about a woman's body and subsequently their behaviors as well. So when we talk about alleged rape cases and when we talk about any kind of rape that takes place, let me just say that, or any kind of sexual assault, there seems to be the first defense is we don't accept what the victim is saying, versus looking at the perpetrator. And I understand it has to go through a court system, there has to be evidence, but I can never really understand why the first defense is, well, the victim is lying.
Yeah, first defense indeed. And the other thing that I don't like, people like to say alleged rape. It's not an alleged rape, she was raped. What's alleged is who did it. A woman comes and says, you're raped, I'm raped. It's not an alleged rape. I'm not pretending I was raped. What's alleged is who did it. And what that brought to mind to me is that I found that in the recent incidents, that when they said that the person was raped, or you heard the version of what the victim said minimum or as maximum as you heard, there were those who said, remember, he's innocent until proven guilty. And that's true, but let me tell you what I want to say clearly, not only for rape, for all crimes. And I'm saying it as a person who has both knowledge and experience of the law, having been a prosecutor and a defense attorney. Let's look at the individual. If Isani says Marlene punched me and stabbed me, the fact that Marlene is not found guilty does not change the fact that you did it.
You were punched and slapped?
Right. If somebody was murdered, and not because Mr. X, Y, and Z got off with that murder, doesn't mean they didn't do the killing. If a female was raped, not because the rapist wasn't convicted, it doesn't mean she wasn't raped. I say that so that you understand two things. What is factual, what you know, no matter whether you proved it in court or not, that's factual. The court system was designed in a civilized society to try, and that's why Madam Justice is blind. Law is not about truth. Get that straight. I always tell people it was the most painful lesson I learned at school. The law and the legal system is not about truth. The legal system is about who can bring the best evidence and prove their case in court. But a civilized society creates a mechanism or a system so that people don't take the law into themselves. So if you said you were raped and you know who your rapist and you go and kill them, and then because you killed them, someone said, oh, you killed my son, they kill you, that's what we become an uncivilized society. So we created
take
this
justice
system.
into our own
We
hands.
created the system wherein the state now takes on the case of the victim. The accused has a right to a private attorney, and only for murder, if you can't afford one, the state must give you one. But there is this system, it's like a game, where under the system where certain rules are created, certain norms are created, you will measure the evidence of both parties so that the state can punish you instead of the victim being upset and goes to punish you. When that system fails you, which it often does in Belize, it fails miserably in Belize. I know many times I've met clients that I'm sure in my heart are guilty, but I know the evidence isn't there. I've only had in my whole career 2 persons confess to a murder. And I've seen many other cases and they will say no. But it does not change the fact that they did it. So that system that this civilized society created to measure the veracity of each other's truth is not necessarily a system that validates truth. It's a system that validates the best evidence you can bring. I have seen, and I've done quite a few of sexual offense cases in my time, where I know the young lady is telling the truth, but they cannot stand up on the stand. Just the mere fact that they're in the same room with the person that raped them, they fall to pieces. And then when the defense attorneys start attack them about certain things, they just crumble. Does it mean that the person wasn't raped? Does it mean the child wasn't abused and sexually assaulted and all of that? It doesn't mean that. It just means that unfortunately, you weren't prepared to go face that secondary assault or tertiary assault because you were assaulted, then the society judged you, and then you went to court, the court system. But it doesn't mean that it's not a fact. And that's what I try to get people to understand.
Isn't it considered then an accusation too, though? When someone can come and say, you know what, I was raped by this person, you still have to go through the process, the medical aspect of it. You still have to go through the legal aspect of proving that you were indeed raped by said individual.
But that's to meet the standard that the court or system requires, or the legal system requires. But does that change the fact that it happened to you? It doesn't change the fact. The problem is that what you experience privately needs to be translated to a high standard that is dictated by the legal system we've created. And if you can't meet that standard, it doesn't mean you're lying. And I think that's where people, we need to, and I want to get into the laws because I think the recent updates have helped to a certain extent in being able to have us understand that sexual violence, there's a full gamut, and it's not just the traditional perception of rape that we have. That only girls could be raped. No, we accept that boys can be raped or males can be raped.
Now this is...
But under our culture, men are like, sure, not me, I don't get raped.
Well,
but it has happened, it has been happening.
We think of men, but for a long time, we could not classify, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, boys, little boys, children as being raped because there was no because the definition of rape was penis in vagina.
Right.
And so, based on anatomy alone, a little boy could not have been raped. But now that was changed with the latest update.
The only thing that a boy then could have claimed was sodomy. A boy. And then even a male could have claimed sodomy, but that has changed now to the extent that they say where there's consent. So it is sodomy automatically for someone that is a minor. Again, age of consent 16 and below. You can claim sodomy. It's a form of rape now, as opposed to before then there wasn't that rape. And it doesn't have to be that a male is penetrating you with their penis. It could be with an object too.
It could be touching too.
And it could be mere touching, like
or
this
oral
section.
Sex.
This section here, so there's an amendment that was done in 2014. And before it says, let me quickly find this part I want. But before you could not have said that it's any sexual assault if they just touch you here, there, or somewhere. And now there's a whole section that deals with
it is extremely detailed,
Every person who intentionally touches another person, that touching being sexual in nature without the person's consent or a reasonable belief that the person consents, and where the touching involved the person's vagina, penis, anus, breast, or any other part of the person's body, or that person being made to touch the person's vagina, penis, anus, or breast, or any other part of the person's body, commits an offense and is liable. And you could either, where that person is 16 years or over at the time the offense was committed, on the summary conviction, you can get an imprisonment of a term of 5 years, or a conviction on indictment a terms of 10 years. So summary is where they take it to the magistrate court, and indictment is where you take it to the Supreme Court. If you take it to the magistrate court, your penalty will be less. If you take it to the Supreme Court, your penalty will be more, which is rather interesting, because then clearly they will try and find a way to keep it in the magistrate court. But I think the DPP office then decides on the severity of that touching. And then where that person was under 16 years at the time the offense was committed, then on summary conviction, 7 years imprisonment, and on indictment, 12 years. So the age makes it's more severe.
Yeah.
So for someone below 16, the penalty is more severe, and for someone above 16, it is still bad, but not a little less severe in terms of time in prison.
Yeah.
And while we have these offenses, I know that there are many people who have suffered that assault and done nothing about it, you know.
While we're engaging in this particular discussion, last week someone was talking to me, and the individual, for whatever reason, did not seem to understand or wasn't even aware that there's such a thing called marital rape, where you have persons in a relationship, and in an instance where perhaps the woman isn't consenting at that particular moment, doesn't permit you to take, so to speak.
So that's one of the myths, that because you're married, or because you are in a relationship, or you have been in a relationship and have had sexual intercourse or contact with that person, that entitles the person to return and have sex with you. And that's one of the worst myths, because it does not mean because you're married that either partner can impose themselves on the other. At that point, the partner has the right to say, no, I don't consent to sexual activity right now. And if they force you, then that is rape, and you can report it. This seldom happens. I know quite a few cases where I've dealt with family matters where the women tell me that the relationship is so abusive, and one of the abuse they keep suffering is sexual abuse, and it's usually attached to financial abuse, where the man says, well, you're in my house, I pay everything, and yes, once you get everything paid there, you have to give me somebody, and whether she wants or not, it happens.
That's
and
like an unreasonable quid pro quo, though. Like,
but it happens more than you think. More than you think. I mean, when I get clients, I'm amazed what all women have been suffering in silence in this country, and doesn't talk about it. And I could see why. Imagine a woman was raped, a child was raped, and they were the few who come forward. Trust me, they are the few who came forward. And when they come forward, the level of assault they have to endure, and endure it more at the hands of other women. Men have made some slight comments, but it has not been as brutal as the comments I've read that women have made. And one of my things that I said was that, you know why the men say the least? Because any man can sit in silence and know that if they chose to, they too can be a rapist. Not that they have the inclination, but by the mere fact, think about it, you're a man. You can overpower any woman you want. I was talking to a guy, and he says, explain that to me, Mr. Audrey. I tell him, okay. I said, imagine you're walking somewhere and you see, here's a crime of opportunity. This young girl by herself on an isolated place. If you want, you could just jump her and do whatever you want. And he says, you know, it's true. He said, I don't have that kind of mentality, but I see what you're saying, that me, by bare fact being a man, I know what I'm capable of doing physically, but that doesn't mean I have that mental inclination. And that's what people don't want to understand. And I think many men recognize that, you know what, I know how brutal I can be if I want. It's because I am a different person, I don't do it. And that is why you find mostly rape is men against women. But there have been instances, and I think more prevalent than we realize, when boys were growing up, that they were really raped because it was an older woman who initiated them. And honestly, from the culture...
I mean, it was a cultural practice that we've always heard of young boys being taken to brothels, and they were children, and that was rape. It wasn't rape under our laws at that time, but it would be now. But I don't
Yep.
want to lose the opportunity, because the two things I want to talk about. I want people to walk away understanding that if any of these things happen to them, they have a chargeable offense.
Yes.
So let's talk about what, and then we'll talk about the evidence factor in the second part of the show. So we started off with the touching. Any inappropriate touch to an
Right.
adult or to a child. And the repercussions are different if it's a child or adult.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be a sexual part of my body.
Right, because it says
If it's my leg and I don't like
right,
it and I didn't invite it.
Right, my thighs,
Yeah.
my tummy.
Yeah.
You will know when someone touches you in a sexual
Yeah.
nature. You will know when it's an unwanted touch, but we tend to brush it off.
Yeah.
I've seen instances where you're in a crowded place and the person intentionally rubs
Yeah.
his penis along
Yeah.
your butt or something, and that's an excuse. That's an assault, and we have to reach the point where we stop accepting these things and
Yeah.
feel that it's our fault.
Yeah.
Women tend, and for some reason, the brain quickly kicks into this mode where they feel like, oh my God, what did I do? But it's because of our socialization, where we have been telling women for a long time, our lady must be seen and not heard.
Yeah.
Or you're being impolite, or you're this, or you're that. And so you start feeling that you are the cause of all
Yeah.
these attacks against you. They don't give you the same sense of identity where you feel, no, I'm entitled to walk in the same space as you. And the same way I don't say nasty things to you, you don't say nasty things to me. I'm entitled to walk on the same street that you walk on, and the same way I don't go and pat your butt, you have no right to pat my butt. I'm entitled to walk on the street, and the same street, and the same way that I don't stretch my hands to go touch your chest, you don't have the right to stretch yours to touch my breast. And the whole list goes on.
Yeah.
My
We don't have
mentality is
that. That's
different.
what equality means. It doesn't mean that you're better than the other. It means that the same
We're
way
just
I
entitled
don't,
to the same protection.
the same protection, the same respect.
Yes.
And we're not teaching that. We're not teaching it even in its classrooms, because the same old heads are teaching the younger generation. In the same homes, the same things are being taught. I mean, every time I talk about sexual offenses, my phone lights up in the inbox. And if I would read the many stories older women tell me now, that they've endured as kids when they were almost raped or were raped by a relative or someone like that. And that's the other thing. The people who usually rape you are people you know.
Yeah.
And know or trust. It doesn't mean that I've known them for years. Kids, usually it's someone from the neighborhood that they've known for some
Or
time.
from the family.
A family friend or a relative. Rape that is like the one that happened last week in Belmopan is someone that you trust.
Yeah.
The young lady was with a group of friends. I mean, if I go hang out with you all, do you think at any point I would think you or Isani will take me somewhere where someone will do me something? I mean, that's the last thing on my mind. Socializing means you let down your guard.
This is where, and I think it's where people start to split hairs over circumstances. And that's why, the law is so specific. It doesn't say if you're alone in a room and it happens. It doesn't say if you've had 2 drinks and it happens.
Yep.
It doesn't say if you're already naked and it happens.
Yes.
It just says that the act happened and you didn't want it to.
Exactly. Lack of consent.
So I think when people always get into the circumstances, but the circumstances doesn't matter.
And it's worse when people say, oh, but they made a drink. Well, because she was drinking, she could not give consent. Intoxication, at
That's in the
whatever
law?
level it is,
Yeah.
it is. Intoxication, actually, how can you give consent? How can you form the ability to consent to something when you're under the influence? It's actually a defense tool for murder and for crimes. If they say Isani went and stabbed up someone, but Isani was high on drugs, he could not form the intention to go kill that person, so it could be manslaughter. That's where manslaughter comes in, that you couldn't form the intention. And one of the things that takes away your ability to form intention is intoxication, insanity, diminished responsibility, and provocation, right? That you could not, you were so provoked that at that moment you lost your natural senses.
Yeah.
Same thing when you are a victim of rape, sexual intercourse, for it not to be unlawful or illegal, requires consent.
Yeah.
So if you are unable to give consent, it's rape. So if you're a minor below 16, you can't give consent, even though I said, yes, okay, take off my underwear for me. No. Even if you say that, that's not consent
You're
in law.
ineligible.
If you're drunk,
Yeah.
you cannot give consent. If you're knocked out because drugged, you cannot give consent. If you said yes because there's a gun at your head or a knife at your throat, you cannot give consent. And that's what people don't understand. But it's a horrible situation to be in.
Yeah.
And it's until you become a victim or work close to someone who is a victim, then you understand what the person goes through.
Yeah.
And I can tell you about countless cases that I had to deal with, but I'll just tell you this one right now, and it reminds me of a young lady that she said there was this van, and every day the van brings a lot of them from the village. The person owned the van, and they carpool, and the person saved on his gas. And she said one morning they came very early, and her work would have started until about 8:30, and so the guy said, just stay with me until I drop off there. But she said, well, we're friendly because we commute in your vehicle every day. We have an agreement where we all pay you to help you. So she said, she stayed in the vehicle, and the guy says, I just have to drop off something after he dropped everybody. So she didn't think anything about it. So when he pulls up in the city, and this is the crazy part of the story, in Belize City, he pulls up on a street that's a bit isolated by a house that has a huge fence, where she thinks, well, that's where he'll go pick up something. So when he moved to go behind the van as to get something, like maybe go drop off something, she didn't think much about it, and he moved right on her. She was in such shock, she was paralyzed, she couldn't even fight back. He raped her, and when he did, after he did, he said, okay, make I drop you to work like if nothing, like if nothing. And then he says, you know, if you tell anybody, they don't believe you, right? And she believed that, and when she went to work, she's trembling and whatever, and her supervisor is saying, what's happened? And she said, nothing.
Yeah.
She said, nothing happened. It's until midday when she couldn't take it anymore and felt she was going crazy. She finally said what happened, you know? And they used that against her in the case.
And I was going to say, and I want us to talk about the evidence or the challenges with evidence as well. Maybe we can do that in the second part of the show, because
that's
I
a
think
huge challenge.
It's perhaps where, in my opinion, I think the legal system is the weakest, because it is so hard. It's such a private matter, and I think this psychological impact is not taken into account. It's
actually there's provision in the law
to
to an extent, you know, but it's not properly used. It's the police that needs to be sensitized on how to investigate sexual offenses. There's actually provision that says the immediate reaction of the person and what she or he first said to people, that you can take that statement, that's one of the exceptions to hearsay rule, you can take that statement and present it as evidence in court, so that you can speak about how the person was at the time when you first approached her or him, or they first told you about the crime.
So before we go to the break, I just want to get a quick list as to what the offenses are. So we know clearly rape is one. We know inappropriate touching is one. Use of objects is another. Right?
So they actually have names for them here. Sexual assault is the one where you can touch anywhere, right? Unlawful sexual intercourse is the one where the person with or without consent has sexual intercourse with the person who is under the age of 14 years, commits the offense of unlawful sexual intercourse and is liable on conviction. So the person with or without consent has sexual intercourse with a person who is under the age of 14 years. That's one. And then there's the one where it's rape of a child, which to me, these two are kind of conflicting or not supporting each other, simply because the rape of a child is every person who rapes another person, and that person is under the age of 16 years. But you just spoke about one where the person is under 14 years. So, you know, it's like they overlap. And if I had to charge someone, I would prefer charge on the rape of a child, simply because the offense, the crime for that, the conviction for that can go up to life,
16.
right?
No.
And this one here, it's a term not less than 12 years. So I would go by it. And if it's on indictment, it's more. And if
Yeah.
it's on and
So
summary
that's one of
conviction,
the discrepancies.
yes, that's one of the one that I'm not comfortable with because
One
after
is
it's-
unlawful sexual
Unlawful
intercourse
sexual
because it's below
intercourse.
the age of consent,
Right.
and the other is rape once the child is under
Right.
14.
So it says, it goes on that same unlawful sexual intercourse says, every person who has unlawful sexual intercourse with a person who is above the age of 14 years, but under the age of 16 years commits an offense. So here's one we're talking about. Every person who with or without consent has sexual intercourse with a person who is under the age of 14 years commits an offense of unlawful sexual
Yeah.
intercourse and is liable on conviction to, on indictment to imprisonment for a term not less than 12 years. Then right below that, here this one, every person who has unlawful sexual intercourse with a person who is above the age of 14 but under the age of 16 commits an offense and is liable on conviction on an indictment to imprisonment for a term not less than 5 years,
But this
not
is
more than 10
interesting
years.
for several reasons. We had a recent case of a 13-year-old, which
Right.
is below the age
Yeah.
of 14.
Below the age of 14.
And I know, and you'll probably jump in on it too, that there is a lot of upset over using the terminology, which is in the law, unlawful sexual intercourse. But that was the charge that was made. So my question
Yeah.
is, why I don't recall many times reporting that it is rape of a child. In fact, the charge that is usually brought is
Right.
unlawful sexual
yeah.
intercourse.
And actually, it's the police at that point that decides what charges, and when it goes to the DPP, then the DPP decides what amendments to make. So,
We've
so
never
this
really
is the
covered-
conflict here
But there's
because
no
people.
real discrepancy between these two laws other than the age. So if
I
a
don't know,
child
but-
is 13,
Well,
they can be, the charge can be rape of a child.
Listen,
We've
under
never really covered, sorry, we've never really covered an incident where that particular terminology is
Rape
used,
of a child, yeah.
I think the only one that comes to mind immediately is with the
Toddler.
3-year-old toddler,
Yeah.
where the guy
that is
Everal
automatic.
was.
But you see the gray, you see why I say I
Yeah.
don't like it? Because this one refers to between 14 and 16, and then rape of a child
Yeah.
is every person who rapes another person and the person is under the age of 16 years.
Yeah.
So that same person who can also be unlawfully sexually have intercourse with
Yeah.
can fall under rape of a child, because if you're 16 and below, you're still a child and it's rape of a child.
Yeah.
And I believe if I was the police and the DPP, I would go for the higher charge.
And see-
Because in this one, rape of a child, it says every person who rapes another person and that person is under the age of 16 years commits an offense and is liable on conviction and indictment to A, imprisonment for not less than 12 years.
Yeah.
In this one, it's not more than 10 years,
Yeah.
right?
The charge is
So the-
stronger under rape than unlawful
Right,
sexual intercourse.
and where the other person who was over 14, so it may extend to life. Here when, where that other person who was over 14 but under the age of 16 years at the time of the offense was committed. So for the one with the child, right? Imagine the mere fact that you're over 14 but below 16, the person can get up to life imprisonment. And B, imprisonment for not less than 15 years but may extend to life where
Yeah.
the other person was under the age of 14 years at the time and when the offense was committed. So having read those definitions to you, let's look at the case with the 13-year-old and the police. The proper charge would be rape of a child. Not only because it carries the proper name, but the penalty is stronger. Why would you? That's why
Well,
this
see,
is the
and-
part
and
that I
that's
didn't
where
like
I have
about
a challenge, because
the
I know I
amendment.
get a lot of concerns because people want to hear us say rape of a child, but that's not the charge that's being put forward. And if we say rape of a child, it is misleading people into believing that the police are charging these perpetrators with the stronger part of the legislation. So I feel that perhaps this is a question that we need to look into further.
I feel it does a disservice to the victims, be it male or female, to have this conflict in the law.
Yeah.
In the unlawful sexual intercourse part, there is the proviso as to what can be a defense, which is different than the rape of a child. So there are some differences, but in terms of what it is, because in both cases it's sexual intercourse that occurs.
Okay, what we got to do though is stick a pin because we have to take a quick break. We'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll continue the conversation. Please stay tuned.
For over 20 years, Great Belize Television, Channel 5, has been the leader in award-winning local programming. We have also produced some of the best video commercials, documentaries, and live events for clients countrywide. And we continue to offer high-quality production services to maximize your advertising needs for your business or organization. From concept to completion, let us help you achieve your marketing goal by producing your commercial, documentary, graphic animation, live event, or even designing your website. Using state-of-the-art equipment and experienced personnel, we can make your ideas come alive. For more information, come see us on Coney Drive or give us a call at 223-0146 or 223-7781 or email us at gbtv@dtl.net. Great Belize Productions, making great television in Belize.
And we're back and we're continuing our conversation with attorney Audrey Matura as we go through what the laws dictate in terms of sexual offenses, be it for children or adults.
Right.
And I just wanted to come back from the break with some of the questions. We've had quite a few come in to us here, and one of them is looking at the issue that we said we'd get to, which is evidence.
Right.
How does one prove, and what are some of the challenges there? I want to ask you this specifically because I know sometimes with children and maybe so with adults, they take a long time to disclose because it's a very traumatizing experience that you don't automatically, you know, after being assaulted or raped or molested, go and say, okay, this happened to me. So it takes some time sometimes to report it. It takes some time to get to the hospital for medical checkups. Talk to me about that part with evidence.
So the first thing I'll say, it's true, it's very difficult to prove. The real evidence comes down to who you believe at the end of the day. And from my experience, having been prosecuting the sexual offenses, it's a matter that's heard before the jury. And the worst experience I had was where the jurors were 8 women and 1 male. And the guy literally said what all he did to the little girl, and they still found him not guilty. And the vote was 8-1. All the women said not guilty, and only the man said guilty. Because he said at the end of the day, it was a child, no matter if she even, because she bang hooked from work and went, right? And they were using that against her. Having said that now, you have to understand that rape is the slightest penetration. Slightest. So it does not mean the person has to ejaculate, so you may never find semen. It does not mean that the person has to penetrate fully, so you may not find injury, and not necessarily every time there's sexual intercourse, there's injury. You know, it's just a misconception. You may not find physical assault, bruises, and so, because not all rape is brutal. Not all of them is that they beat you and punch you, and so there's this misconception that if you never kick and fight back, they never rape. That's not true. And if the person, especially if the person has been drugged or sedated, there would be no fighting back. So rape is the slightest penetration of the penis into the vagina or any part of the body, as we say, because it can be anal as well.
And mouth.
And mouth as
Any
well.
orifice of the body.
Any orifice of the body. So going to a doctor, the fact that they didn't find semen doesn't mean you weren't raped. But you still need to go through the rape kit scenario, simply because in a rape kit, not only should they do the vaginal swab and check see if there's been any trauma there, but they really should take and get your clothes, because if there's hair of the other person on your body, how does that explain how certain things, or the fiber of their clothes on your clothes? But sadly, we're not at that level yet.
We don't have that kind of, do we have that forensic capacity?
So that sometimes they make you take back your clothes. I mean, I've seen it in all different types of cases. Then the other reason you still go to the medical doctor is because they really should also take a blood sample right there and then, because you don't know what all will, and there should be a checklist. I can't say that I know what a rape kit is in Belize. There might be one. I don't know the protocols because I've left that area for a while. I hope there are protocols in place. But basically, you need to take a blood test, because remember, there is provision again in the law where you are given a noxious substance that inhibits your ability to give consent. You also need to know if the person, what level of alcohol level they had in their blood, because while you may put down a woman, oh, she made a drink, which we all have the right to do if we so choose to, the fact that she was drinking then means that there could not have been consent, right? So all those things helps with evidence.
Let me ask
but
a
there's
question here.
unusual cases where it is rape by the mere fact that you took out your penis and you put it somewhere in her body, or you even put it at the slightest penetration. And literally when we are at law school, the professor says, look, if the penis just touches by the mouth, that is rape.
Yep.
Because you did, and there was and why is it rape? It makes sense. I remember there was a young lady who confided in me how her uncle tried to rape her. And I said to her, oh my God, I said, at least he didn't get to penetrate to you. And she said to me, Miss Audrey,
That isn't
whether he penetrated me or not, it is equally traumatic. And that was a reality check. So
Yeah.
rape in itself, it's not just that physical
It's the
assault.
violation.
So let me
It's
ask
the
a
whole
follow-up.
violation
Let me
of
ask a follow-up
your
question.
personal space and self and private
Yeah.
parts.
At the beginning of this second part of the segment, Marlene mentioned that for some persons it takes a while for them to come forward to actually say that they have been raped.
Yeah.
From a legal perspective, what is the statute of limitation? Because while yes, you may or may not go and get a rape kit done, if 6 months passes or a certain amount of time elapses, then do you still have a legal space, so to speak, to bring forward this
Yes.
charge?
Actually, we don't have any statute of limitation on rape in Belize,
Okay.
thankfully.
And what
in
about
the US,
other
they
forms
actually
of assault?
have. Yeah, there was other forms, some minor forms where it says you have to be within 12 months. But since the
So it's like the
amendment,
touching?
since the amendment, I really would
Okay.
have to go back and tell you that I don't have that at the tip of my finger, and I don't want to
Okay.
mislead. But I know under the old law, for the assault, it had to be within 12 months.
Okay.
But one of the beauty of our law has always been that we actually have fairly good laws when it comes to sexual offenses, but the way the police investigate it and the steps they take is very poor. And so without the evidence before the court, you can't get a conviction. And then the way the society looks at it, you can actually bring a rape charge against a person years after. And of course it means that at the time,
But then the burden of proof then,
it's still on you. But it's normal. Let me tell you what, it's normal for a victim not to come forward immediately. They seldom come forward immediately. They
They
seldom.
seldom come forward at all.
Like the case in Belmopan, clearly within hours the person, well, immediately I'm told after it happened, the person said, no, I've been raped, and insisted that she was raped. Unfortunately, her own friend betrayed her by not taking her to the hospital, the same friend that took her there. And people don't look at that other aspect. And it was actually another male who was there that took her to the hospital. But imagine socializing with all these people and feeling like, hey, I'm cool.
Do we have
And they
a
do
charge
that.
for accessory to rape?
Yes, actually, I wish the accessory conspiracy abetment, all of that exists. So those people who did not want to assist her when she was raped need to be arrested and charged as well. I mean, honestly, if you'd put me in charge of a sexual offense unit, I would go all out. Let the system prove otherwise. But unfortunately, we don't have anyone in the police or the DP police office who has a vigorous passion to bring justice for victims of sexual offense. And that's nothing new. I went through that when I was there and up to today.
we don't have a
It's-
special victims unit where we,
don't.
deal with those
We don't have
specific
the-
cases.
We don't have. So to answer, years later you can. Clearly, it's your word against the person's word. I don't know if you all remember this very famous rape case of a pilot that had raped his own goddaughter. He served time. He was convicted, and he had taken her, brought her to Belize. Clearly, because you trust, it's your godfather. The mother sent her. So what? And they had stayed at a hotel in Belize City, and then he rapes her. And she then, I think a day or two later, reports it or whatever. The thing is, she gave very good evidence. She was able to hold up her story, and those judgmental people are saying, oh, but why is she going in a room with him, her godfather, whatever? You don't know how much, you've grown up like a father with that person. You don't know how much you trust. But the thing is, he was convicted, and he spent time in prison. I don't know if he has been released. I can't tell you about a case necessarily that person took long, and still won. But I know of an incest case I did that, but it was continuous. From the little girl was 9, her father was sexually abusing her. And she finally, well, the mother finally noticed when she caught him red-handed when the little girl was 12. So imagine. And that was a hard case to deal with. Oh, that was one of the sickest cases I ever dealt with. He was convicted, and of course he was undefended, so he tried to tell the little girl, you're lying, and he came up with these strange stories. But that little girl who was so afraid of him, and on that 1 minute on the stand, he just turns around and tells him, you know what you did to me. You know. And that sealed his case. Actually, the jury actually found him guilty. But I must say again, on that jury, there were mostly men. And I will keep on making that distinction, not to put women down, because there are a lot who come forward, but to wake up those women who keep attacking the victims.
And I've had conversations with people too, and I don't, maybe we need a psychologist or an anthropologist to perhaps dive deeper into this, because there is, we spoke of first the victim blaming that takes place, but there's always I don't want to say we're protecting the men, but the first thing is that we seem to not be able to accept that it's possible. I'll give an example that's non-Belize. How many people are still out there defending Bill Cosby? We knew him in one light, and it was so hard to be able to also put into context that there was this other deviant side to him. And it's the same with perpetrators when we hear about them. We know it in abuse cases for children. You know, it's your stepfather or your uncle, and you're like, no, he wouldn't do that. He's great with children. You hear it from a rapist, that somebody you saw, oh, well, he no need for do that to gal. Or an upstanding citizen. Or first, not our, but some people
generally
will say, oh, well, he don't look like the type.
It's not about looks. And it's not about economic background or something. Rape is more about the power and control than its sexual activity. Let me tell you what's one of the myths, like, oh my God, she even fat and ugly and old, who I want rape she. Let me tell you, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that at that moment you can exert such control over a person that no matter what they do, they belong to you. And I was telling my staff that my first encounter with rape as a child was when I was about 8, 9. I didn't even know to say the word rape. It was rake. To me, it was rake. But there was this neighborhood, my neighborhood, we had an older lady, Miss Maivit. She was like in her 70s going to 80s. Everybody respected her. She lived by herself. Her son lived next to us, and every day he goes and takes care of his mom. And I remember one night, my parents frantic, they locked us up in the house, and all the adults went because they found this lady dead. She was strangled. But the guy also raped her. And the guy who raped her was 25 years old. He raped that older woman and then strangled her. So what do you say?
They're abuse victims. I mean, they're rape victims of all ages.
You're mistaking rape, which is a crime and a sexual offense, or an offense in sexual nature, but it's really a crime about control over your sexuality and everything that's sexual about you. You're confusing that with sexual attraction, which is a normal thing where you are sexually attracted to certain type of people and want to have a sexual relationship with them, which should be healthy. This one is unhealthy. This one is healthy.
And I think
this one has nothing to do with the person's actual physical being. This one may have a lot to do with her or his physical attribute. And because we don't educate our people about the difference, they crisscross them. And they don't understand the level of ignorance.
Understand the sexual deviance that people can have. But what
It's
about,
crazy.
and I'm sure you hear it all the time, oh, it's a false accusation. So first of all, I want to talk about whether there's protection or recourse for people for false accusation, but even more so, how often do we find that it is a false accusation? And it's one of those things that I don't...
Remember what I said when we started. I've known instances where at the last hour, the women have withdrawn the cases. I lived it, I worked it. And some of them are adults and some of them are kids. They refuse to go and take the stand. But because the legal system we put in place that measures the veracity or the truth or the evidence requires that you take the stand to prove or disprove the case, by that legal system, the person is acquitted or the case is dismissed and they say, see, I never did do it. I was not found guilty. So they classify that as false accusation, but that is not necessarily false accusation. No, actual false accusation, those are very minimal. Very, very minimal. And in Belize, I can't give you statistics. It does happen, Isani. I remember reading one in the US where the girl accused this famous player because, well, she wanted to get money, right? And poor guy was convicted, and afterwards she came forward and said it was false. And it's cases like that that make the others look unreal.
Yeah.
Okay,
but that usually takes a whole lot of planning, and the reason why that usually is successful, like it was successful in the US, was because of the racial imbalance. A white girl comes and says a black man raped her, they would quickly jump and believe that immediately. And that has to do with that.
Let me ask a question here. I've been dying to get to this point. Look, you can't determine what goes through someone's mind. So if, for instance, I'll use a woman as the example here. If a woman decides that she has it out for a particular person and makes a claim, makes a false claim.
She still has to prove it.
And even if she doesn't prove it in court, you would have defamed that individual. So that at the end of it, if you are acquitted of the charge, your reputation, your name has still been solid, has still been dragged through the mud.
And you have
and then
a
society still looks at you as the rapist, because that's how we think. Oh, see the man that will rape the young girl or whatsoever the case, even though it's farthest from the truth.
And that's why you have the recourse. So if that happened to you, and you know to your heart that's not true, then you have the recourse to bring a charge of libel or defamation against the person, because they defamed you. But the truth is, I am yet to meet a victim that I've worked with that I disbelieve. I am yet. Because you have to really be a damn good actress for go through that turmoil, that emotional turmoil that you go through. And that's a difference which a court seldom gets to see. And that's why the law says that it makes provision that when the person reports it, her physical, emotional demeanor, everything must be recorded. Because you have to be a damn good actress, make you cry incessantly for 4 or 5 hours when you're talking to someone. And for you to, you could see the whole difference. You could pretend that for a while, but you have to be darn good, or you have to be a psychopath to be able to do that.
And see, and that's where I was getting at when I say that we rationalize because it feels easier to say maybe it's a false accusation.
But you know how much evil it takes for you to come up with a false accusation?
But not only that,
then that person's
I think facts speak for itself. How often do we have the case lead to a false accusation? I mean, it's always possible. It clearly is always possible. People are deviant, male and female. And some people are just outrightly malicious. But if we look at the facts, it's like saying, yes, rape happens to men and women, but it predominantly happens to women.
And sadly, the men don't report it.
So I think that it's not that you are neglecting to say it doesn't happen. It's just we got to look at what the bigger problem here is. And it seems to be easy to say, well, oh, it's a false accusation, but we don't see that very much.
But honestly, those who make the false accusation, honestly, if they're found,
they deserve to be punished.
They need to be punished because they're taking someone else's pain and trivializing it. I had a guy text me and said to me, because of all I was saying about sexual offenses last week, saying that, you know, I once had a girl that, you know, I liked her and we went to a hotel and we did our thing afterwards, and then she turns around to me, maybe she think it was funny, and she says, you know, I could tell people that you raped me, right? And he said he felt like he just, like that hit him like, what? Imagine, I know I didn't rape you and you do that. Of course, she just said that. She just said that, no, but she didn't go the other step. But I agree with you. You know what it would take for her? You know what it would take for her to prove that? Given how all the circumstances, how they got there? Let's not forget that with rape, there is the whole physical thing. But there's a part of the psychological trauma and the emotional trauma the person goes through that cannot be masked, cannot be invented.
Well,
and that's why you have to get the experts involved immediately.
There's also the situation of date rape, where you go out with someone, perhaps on the first instance, and then for whatever reason, the individual believes that, you know what,
That's the next step.
I've probably paid for the food, I've probably done everything to this point, so now you owe me this, and then they proceed to come at you in a forcible manner, for want of a better description. But I think people don't look at that either. Like we don't hear of instances
those I'm told, 1 in 4 women get raped, and those of that 10% will report it.
Because of the very
because
same
there's a
reason.
sense of guilt that they caused it, right?
Because people think of the judgment that they're going to experience. You're out with him, you had
But
drinks,
I will,
this, you
I will
that.
give a warning to young women. It could go to young men, especially depending the group you're running in. But I'll give a warning. There is a new trend, and when I say new, it may be in this decade, where your own friends, they set you up. There's this thing called train rape or train sex, where they one after the other. When you see
It's called a
suddenly,
gangbang, if I'm not mistaken.
No,
they call it all kind. They
Yeah.
call it all kind of thing. And about 3 years ago, we actually saw a video of a little girl where one guy after the other was on her, and they video it, and so it's still happening. Be very careful who your friends are, and don't go places that you're not familiar with. Let your parents, someone know where you are, and don't take drinks, because in one of the recent incidents, the person says, you know, I was given a drink and I did feel different after that, and X, Y, and Z happened to me, and this is where the police and the medical staff, they failed when they did not do the blood tests. You needed to have extracted blood immediately and test those blood, because that then would inhibit you from giving consent. But just be careful. Do not become trusting. Those same people that you think are your friends, sometimes they set you up. There's a thing where there are men that are in certain position and power, and they invite one young lady and say, you know, bring your friends them. They have a certain intention. After your friend is raped or a group of them has done whatever they want to you or their friends, you will never go say it, because you knew that you went there, and you feel it has happened more than we accept, and those have remained unreported. The only reason I know about some of them is because people come and confide in me.
Yeah.
And no matter how much I try to convince them, let's go to the police, I will go with you, Miss Audrey, they don't believe me, and the rape will be more than I have already endured.
Yeah, you have to relive that entire
Over
ordeal.
and over.
And then what makes it worse for Belize, the crime happens this year, and 3-5 years from now, then the case will come up. By then, you have already tried to move on. I
with your
remember
life.
a little young lady that I had to do the case with. She says, Miss, I'm married now, and I just had a baby, and I don't want to go through all of that. I remember a case of a girl that was gang raped in Belmopan, and it took 5 years later for it to come. At that point, she could not cope with it. She had gone through therapy and everything, and she refused to deal with it. So does that mean that those little boys didn't rape her? It doesn't mean they didn't rape her. It just means that she could not find the fortitude and the strength to go face it. So what I tell the females around me, I said, every male that you hang out with is a potential rapist. And you need to start seeing it like that. They will look out for themselves, you got to damn look out for yourself. And every situation you put yourself in, measure it very well. Because I was thinking after the incident in Belmopan that, hey, I'm a 50-year-old woman and I do hang out with young people. Could you imagine me, because I know my kids are friends and I trust them, and like, I would never think a younger person would rape me, because I would say I could be your mom. But that brought a reality check to me that it doesn't matter the age. I told you the incident when I was a child of the 80-year-old woman. Every person and every situation, you have to be smart enough and measure it. And not everybody that says is your friend is really your friend. Sometimes they set you up. And you need to be smart. Or not, that is a trauma you will live with that you will never tell people. And people will wonder why you're acting weird, and why you're drinking, or why you seem so loose, or why you can't get certain things together, why you're going through depression. A lot of people you're seeing out there suffering right now, they've endured it. They've lived it.
Yeah.
And some of them get themselves together, but you don't know the turmoil they live in their head.
Yeah.
And very few people feel like they could confide in someone. Like one of the persons who texted me, she says, you know, it was until I got married, I told my husband, and my husband helped me to get help.
Yeah.
And that was an assault she went through from a child.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that spans a crime and spans a psychological problem that requires treatment, and spans into a social crisis where a society is not lenient towards the victims. We're
And you
still
see,
a macho society.
The thing is, with the underreporting that we know that happens with rape, and the type of reaction when a rape is reported, it leads to more underreporting.
More.
But if we really think about it, it means that we leave more perpetrators out there to have more victims, because rapists very seldomly strike once.
No, they never strike once.
And especially when it comes to abuse cases, they very rarely strike once. That's what the data says. So we won't report if we know we'll be crucified, and we'll report less after we see one being crucified, which means the perpetrator is out there, and we all have family.
And they bank on you not reporting, and they bank on those few people that say, oh, but there can be malicious reports. But please remember, those are the extreme exception. So don't put it in the group that the norm is that there are more sexual assaults than we want to accept.
Yes.
I told you on the weekend that I witnessed a sexual assault. That was a sexual assault, a verbal sexual assault against that lady and her husband. What that man, those tourists were being told, it was so degrading and nasty.
All right. Well, Audrey, that wraps up our time this morning. We did touch on some of the laws and, of course, the evidence that is needed. But we do appreciate you being a part of this conversation this morning.
Anytime. It's one of the topics I have a passion for.
Yeah.
You know, I wish I could do more, but at least I try to share my knowledge, and I hope everybody does their part. And please, women, do your part, be safe, and also do your part to teach your sons not to become a predator.
That's right.
Because it's a woman that rocks that cradle.
Yeah.
We raise those sons.
That's right. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking about a yoga scholarship. So please stay tuned.